Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card. Today I've got a special card. It's a heart shape, and I'm using a couple of different Stampin' Up! Sets. The first is a Celebration set, which comes for free when you spend $50. I love the font in this thanks word. The next is Borderettes. It's just a series of borders, and I'm using my Little Bee heart dies, which I've used in a previous video. It's special. It's got 11 dies, and it has dies that cut just crosses to get some stitching on the inside. And it's got a really nice magnetic closure in the packaging. And then I'm also using some Let's Poco Lawn Fawn paper. I've been buying some pattern paper recently, but usually I buy the ones that are a single color, and that way you can use it as a background. So I'm going to take my dies and pull out the outermost hearts, the largest ones. I'll cut the outside heart and the crosses that go with it. I use a paper piercer to get it lined up exactly. I'll run that through my Big Shot machine. This is Nina Solar White cardstock. It's going to be my card base. You can see how the stitching gets cut. It's very, very nice. And then next I'm going to take that same outermost die and I'm going to cut my Let's Poco paper. And this is going to be the front of my card. And notice I slanted it a little bit differently when I walked over to my Big Shot machine so that my lines would come out just perfectly on the front. So this is the innermost heart, and that I'm cutting out of also Nina Solar White. So you can see my three pieces that I'm going to be using. Now I'm going to take my set, and I'm going to show you how I store my Stampin' Up! Stamps. I keep the outermost rubber, and I stick that to the inside of my case, and that way my stamps aren't rolling all around my case. And I decided not to put the labels on because it's easier to adhere to the blocks that way, and I didn't really need them. So I'm going to use a Stamp-A-Majig. Now I'm using a Stamp-A-Majig, but you're going to find out later that this is not actually straight. It appears straight, but it's not actually straight. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and ink this up with some Memento Tuxedo Black ink because I'm going to be coloring it with Copic markers. And I didn't use my Misty because I can't see the top of the stamp because of the foam rubber, so I went ahead and used my Stamp-A-Majig because it was easier. Alright, now I'm using a technique here with my Copic markers where I'm using two different colors and merging them in the center. I've got R22 and Y15, and I'm flicking upward. So actually at the bottom it doesn't really matter because you have solid color. But once I get toward the middle, you can see I'm flicking my pen upward to meet the pink. And then I'll turn it back over and I'll do it again with the pink just to merge those two colors and get them blended. But you want to do a flicking motion because that way as you flick your pen is lifting off the paper and you'll get a thinner application of the alcohol ink as you get upward, and that way you don't get too much ink and saturate the paper where the two colors meet, and it'll get a better blend that way. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of these colors, meeting them in the middle here, and I'm also coloring the shadow or the block sort of dimension behind it. So I'm going to finish up all of these, and I'm going to fast forward this to the S here. And then what I'm going to do is take my C1 and I'm going to color the block behind it just to give it a little bit more shadowy dimension in the back. I'm going to finish up with my S here. Alright, now I'm going to let that dry for a while, and while it's drying I'm going to score my bottom portion of the card. I'm using a T-square which has a little bit of a lip on it, and I'm going to line up the left and the right side of the heart, so where those little joints are. And that way I know that I'm scoring it straight. And I'm also going to make sure that my score line comes right where the curve, right here where the center of the curve is. That way I don't get a hole when I open up the card, and you'll see in a second. So once I get that all lined up, I'll remove my T-square and I'll take my bone folder and I will score it up and down. You want to make it a pretty strong score line because that's how the card's going to be opening. And then I'll fold it down and you'll see how it's really flush right there. There's no hole, and that's because I placed my score line just right. Alright, to fix my mistakes where I've colored outside the line, I'm going to take my colorless blender, which actually removes color. It doesn't blend anything. And by coloring where you colored outside the lines, it'll push the color back over the line. And you want to do this after it dries. You'll get the best results. Now this next technique is going to use my colorless blender refill, which I've filled up a mister with. and I've labeled it Colorless Blender, and I'm taking a piece of fabric. This is terry cloth, but you can use any fabric that has texture on it. You could use denim, you can use corduroy, there's lots of different things you can do. So I'm going to take this mister and I'm going to liberally spray my fabric. So it's not soaking wet, but it's definitely wet. Now this is in real time, so I'm really not going to hold it down very long. So I'm going to place it down there, push it with my fingers just a little bit and remove it. And then I'll take my fabric and I'll spray it again. This alcohol dries pretty quickly. Put it on the area that hasn't been done yet. And then I'll just hold it down for a second or two, and then I'll lift it up. Now I'll show you how it removes color and it leaves the texture of the terry cloth. It's a very, very cool technique, and it looks really good with these letters because they're so big, and it kind of just adds something to it. Okay, so my camera turned off just for a minute or two, but I'm going to show you what I did, what you missed. I just stamped For Being You with Memento ink, and so here I'm just showing you where I used my Stamp-A-Majig, again, because I can't really see, it's not a clear stamp, so I can't really see where it's stamping, and I find that Stamp-A-Majig is the easiest thing to use. So for the arrows, though, I'm going to be using the Misty, and this is where you start to see that my thanks is not really straight. So I put my grid on top of it to see where my arrows were going to be placed. And I'll take this border and I'm going to make the arrows face the left side on the top. I'm going to place them on my grid, close it up, and that'll put my stamp on the lid. And then I'll remove that grid sheet. I'll ink it up with some Memento ink again. Just trying to keep everything consistent, and then I'll close my lid and stamp it, and it comes out perfect. So even though it's not, I made the arrows straight against the thanks, but I don't think you really notice too much that it's crooked on the heart in general. So I move my heart all the way to the right hand side, and notice that I'm using my Misty in a different way, in that I'm using it kind of up and down rather than sideways. So if you have a long stamp, you can just turn your Misty 90 degrees, and it can be long enough for your stamp. So I didn't want to stamp my foam. I just stuck some Post-it underneath there because it was on my desk. So anyway, that's using the Misty, and then I used my ATG gun to adhere this white panel to my Lawn Fawn pattern paper. And then here's my card base, which I'm putting a bunch of ATG tape on it, and I'll line it up at the top. I kind of looked up from the side, and that's how I lined it up. And that's the card for today. So you can see how it opens it, and there's no hole, and just something different. It's got some stitching on the base, which is nice too. So anyway, that's the card for today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.